I still remember the exact weight of that phone in my hands. Small, black, cold as a stone pulled from the bottom of a river. I hadn't turned it on yet. I just sat there on the edge of my bed, holding it in both palms the way you'd hold something fragile or something dangerous. And I stared at it in the lamplight until my eyes burned. Outside, the October wind was pushing leaves against my window. The house was completely silent. It had been silent for 3 years now, ever since the day I lost the only person who made it feel like a home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I was sitting alone in my bedroom at 11 o'clock at night, shaking like a leaf and clutching a stranger's secret in my hands, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to before any of this happened. Back to when life was still ordinary, and I was still just a grandmother who knitted baby blankets and watered her garden on Sunday mornings. My name is Dorothy Harwell. I'm 69 years old. I've been a widow for 15 years, ever since my husband Robert passed from a heart attack one cold February morning, the kind of morning where the sky is white and everything feels very still and very far away. After Robert died, I had one thing left that made getting up in the morning feel worthwhile. My son, Nathan. Nathan Harwell was 32 years old when he died. He was a doctor, internal medicine, and he had his father's dark eyes and his father's stubborn kindness, the kind of kindness that sometimes made you want to shake him by the shoulders and say, "Nathan, not everyone deserves that much of you." But that was who he was. He trusted people completely and loved them without conditions, and I suppose that was both his greatest gift and the crack in his armor that let the wrong person in. He brought Vanessa home on a Sunday afternoon in early spring, about 4 years before he died. I remember she was wearing a cream-colored blouse, pressed perfectly, not a single wrinkle. Her smile was wide and white, and she shook my hand with both of hers and said, "Mrs. Harwell, Nathan talks about you constantly. I feel like I already know you." She was beautiful. She was charming. She said all the right things. And somewhere in the back of my mind, the quiet, animal part that doesn't use words, something went still, the way a bird goes still right before a storm. I told myself I was being a protective mother. I told myself any woman who loved my son would feel like an intruder to me at first. I pushed that cold, wordless feeling down deep, and I smiled back at Vanessa Reed, and I said, "Any woman Nathan loves is welcome in this house." I wish I had listened to that quiet part of myself. I wish I had listened a long time before I did. They married the following spring. Nathan called me the morning after he proposed, so excited his voice kept cracking. He said, "Mom, she said yes before I even finished asking. She just grabbed my face and said yes." I laughed. I told him I was happy, and part of me genuinely was, because when Nathan was happy, it was impossible not to feel some of it yourself. His joy was contagious that way. A year into the marriage, Vanessa announced she was pregnant. Nathan called me that evening, and I could hear him pacing back and forth across the kitchen floor the entire time he talked, the way he'd done as a little boy when he was too excited to stay still. They were going to have a girl. They painted the nursery a soft blush pink. Nathan assembled the crib himself over 2 full weekends, refusing to read the instructions until he'd already gotten it wrong twice. When I saw him standing in that little pink room with paint on his forearms and the most purely happy expression I had ever seen on an adult man's face, I felt something in my chest loosen. Maybe I had been wrong about Vanessa. Maybe the coldness I'd felt that first afternoon was nothing more than my own fear of losing my son to someone new. I decided to make something for the baby, something made by hand, something she could keep. I chose a soft mint green yarn, the color of new leaves in April, the color of hope, if hope had a color. I sat in my armchair every evening for 3 weeks, and I knitted. Every stitch was deliberate. Every row was a small prayer. When I was finished, I had a blanket that was soft enough to press against your cheek and sturdy enough to last for years. Nathan loved it immediately. He held it up to the light and shook his head slowly, the way he did when something moved him beyond words. "Mom," he said, "this is magical. I'm telling you, whenever Lily's crying, I'm going straight for this blanket." He was right, as it turned out. Every single time. Lily was born on a Thursday morning in late October, small and dark-haired and so intensely alert for a newborn that the nurses kept remarking on it. She had Nathan's eyes, that deep liquid brown that seemed to take in everything. I held her for the first time in the hospital room and I thought, here you are. Here is the reason for all of it. The next 2 years were the best years I'd known since Robert died. Nathan would bring Lily over on Sunday afternoons, and I'd sit on the living room floor with her while Nathan made coffee, and we'd stack blocks and read picture books, and she'd fall asleep wrapped in her mint green blanket while I held her. And I would sit there not moving, not wanting to break the spell of it. Then came the Tuesday in September that broke my world in half. I was in the middle of deadheading my roses when my phone rang. Vanessa's name on the screen. Before I even answered, something in my body already knew. The same quiet animal part of me that had gone still the day I met her. Her voice on the line was barely recognizable, high and broken, gasping between words. Nathan had fallen. The stairs at home. His head. He wasn't responding. The ambulance was already there. I drove to the hospital in 15 minutes. I don't remember the drive. I remember parking crookedly across 2 spaces and not caring. I remember the automatic doors of the emergency entrance sliding open with a hiss of cold air. Vanessa was sitting in a chair against the far wall of the waiting room. She was wearing a pearl gray dress, and there were dark smears on the sleeve. Blood, I realized slowly. Blood that wasn't hers. When she saw me, she stood up and walked toward me and put her arms around me, and I let her, because I didn't know what else to do, because my mind was still catching up to what my body already understood. A doctor came through the double doors. He was young, younger than Nathan, and he had the expression that doctors learn to wear, careful and flat, giving nothing away until they're ready to give everything away at once. He said the words, severe head trauma. They'd done everything they could. He was so sorry. I don't remember falling. I remember the floor being cold against my knees, and Vanessa's hands on my shoulders, and the fluorescent light above me being too bright. All of it too bright. And somewhere far away, someone was making a sound like an animal caught in something it couldn't escape. It took me a long time to realize the sound was coming from me. In the weeks after Nathan's funeral, I told myself that Vanessa was grieving in her own way. She became quiet, distant. The phone calls grew shorter and further apart. When I asked to visit Lily, there was always a reason it wasn't a good time. The baby had a cold. Vanessa was working extra shifts. She was reorganizing the house. She needed space. I gave her space. I told myself, she lost her husband. She's 29 years old, and she lost her husband. Be patient, Dorothy. Don't be the overbearing mother-in-law. Give her room. So I waited. I called when I felt I could without pushing. I left small gifts in the mailbox, a stuffed rabbit, a board book about seasons, a little knitted hat for the winter. Sometimes Vanessa would send a brief text. Lily loves it, thank you. Mostly she didn't respond at all. And on the rare occasions when I was allowed inside that house to see my granddaughter, I noticed something I couldn't quite name. The warmth that Vanessa had always performed so flawlessly, the wide smile, the of course, Mrs. Harwell, any time, it was gone. In its place was something stripped and cold. Her eyes, when they looked at me, were calculating in a way that made me feel like I was being measured for something, like she was deciding how much of a problem I was going to be. I told myself it was grief changing her. I told myself I was projecting. I was wrong on both counts. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 years after Nathan died, when everything changed. I'd bought a set of wooden stacking toys for Lily, the kind with bright painted rings, simple and good, the kind I'd bought for Nathan when he was small. I wasn't planning to knock on the door. I didn't want to put Vanessa in the position of having to invite me in and resent me for it. I was just going to leave them in the mailbox with a little note and drive away. I parked across the street. The house looked the same as always. White painted wood, tidy garden, the kind of house that looked like nothing bad could ever happen inside it. I was reaching into the back seat for the bag of toys when the garage door rolled open. Vanessa came out dragging 2 large black garbage bags, one in each hand. She was moving quickly, her jaw set, her movements hard and purposeful, the way people move when they're angry at something and taking it out on an inanimate object. She hauled the first bag to the dumpster at the end of the driveway and shoved it in, then the second. And as the second bag went in, I saw it. A flash of mint green, bright as a spring leaf, spilling out of the torn corner of the bag before Vanessa stuffed it down and slammed the dumpster lid shut with a sound like a gunshot. I sat in my car and I didn't move. My hands were in my lap and I was watching the garage door roll closed again, and I was thinking, that was the blanket. That was the blanket I spent 3 weeks making, the one Nathan called magical. The one Lily fell asleep in every Sunday afternoon in my living room. Why would Vanessa throw that away? Why would she throw away something so tied to Nathan? Something Lily loved? Something handmade with... Why would she do it like that? Like she was angry at it. Like she wanted it gone. I sat for 5 minutes after the garage door closed. Then I got out of my car. The dumpster smelled like cold coffee grounds and something floral. Expensive perfume, the kind Vanessa always wore. I found the bag quickly. I pulled the blanket out and held it against my chest without looking at it, the way you'd rescue something living. And I walked back to my car and drove home. I spread the blanket on my bed under the lamp and I smoothed it with both hands. It was dirty, wrinkled. It smelled like that expensive perfume and something else underneath. Something closed and stale, like something that had been stored somewhere dark. The mint green was dull now, nothing like the bright color I remembered. But the structure was intact. The lace edging I'd spent an extra 4 days getting right was still firm and even. I ran my palms across the whole surface, slowly, the way a blind person reads. I felt it on the 3rd pass. Dead center, a hard rectangle, no bigger than a deck of cards, sandwiched between the 2 layers of batting. Not shifting when I pressed it. Solid, like something that had been placed there deliberately and then sewn in to stay. My hand stopped moving. I turned the blanket over and searched the edges until I found it. A line of tiny, immaculate stitches along the bottom hem, made with thread that matched the fabric so precisely you'd never see it unless you were looking. Someone had opened the blanket, placed something inside, and then sewn it shut again with the kind of careful, unhurried precision that takes time. Takes intention. I went to my nightstand. I got the small sewing scissors I've kept in the same drawer for 30 years, the ones I'd used to make this very blanket. My hands were shaking enough that I had to stop and press them flat against my thighs before I could start cutting. Thread by thread, each small snip was very loud in the silence of the room. When the last thread gave way and the opening spread apart, I reached inside with 2 fingers and touched something cold and smooth and hard. I pulled it out and set it on the bed in front of me. A cell phone, small and black, an older model, 4, maybe 5 years old. Screen dark, powered off. I stared at it for a long time. Then I got up and went to my dresser and opened the bottom drawer where I keep old cables and chargers I've never been able to bring myself to throw away, and I found one that fit. I plugged it into the wall. I plugged in the phone. And I sat on the edge of my bed and I watched the small screen and I waited. 5 minutes. 10. The room was absolutely still. Outside, the October wind kept pushing leaves against the glass. Then the screen flickered. A thin bar of light appeared in the corner. Battery at 3%, charging. I kept waiting. When it finally lit up completely, there was no lock screen, no passcode, no security of any kind. It opened directly to the home menu, as if whoever hid it here had either been too rushed to set a password or had fully expected that no one would ever find it. My thumb hovered over the screen. I opened the photo gallery first. The first image loaded and I felt the floor shift underneath me. Vanessa, a restaurant I didn't recognize, candlelit linen tablecloths, the kind of place you go to celebrate something or impress someone. She was laughing, her head tilted back, and she was not alone. There was a man beside her, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, maybe 10 years younger than she was, and his arm was around her, and he was pressing his lips against her cheek with easy, comfortable familiarity. The date stamp in the corner read 4 years ago. 4 years ago, when Nathan was alive, when Vanessa was my son's wife. I kept scrolling. The same man, the same woman, a beach somewhere warm, a hotel room, the front seat of a car, both of them laughing at something off camera. Dozens of photographs, all from the same period, all stamped with dates that fell inside Nathan and Vanessa's marriage. My son had been in love with this woman. He had trusted her without reservation. He had built a life with her and assembled a crib and stood in a pink nursery with paint on his arms and the most purely happy expression I had ever seen. And she had been doing this. I sat on the edge of the bed and the tears came without any sound, just sliding down my face while I kept scrolling, kept looking, unable to stop. Then I opened the messages. The contact was saved only as D. The early messages were romantic. Vanessa telling him she couldn't stop thinking about him, that she hated going home, that being with Nathan felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. She called my son boring. She called him suffocating. She called him an obstacle. My hands tightened around the phone. I kept reading. The messages grew darker, more desperate. She wanted a life with Dee. She wanted to stop hiding. She'd tried to talk to Nathan about a divorce, but he wouldn't consider it. Too traditional, she wrote. Too stubborn. He'll never let go. And then, in a message dated 10 days before Nathan died, there has to be another way. I need him gone. I put the phone down on the bed. I stood up and walked to the window and pressed both palms flat against the cold glass, and I breathed. In and out. In and out. Then I went back to the phone. Dee had replied, "Don't say crazy things. Just wait." But Vanessa hadn't waited. A week later, I talked to someone who can help. Just trust me. And then the messages stopped. The last message in the thread was dated 8 days before Nathan died. After that, silence, as if both of them had agreed, without saying so, that nothing else should be written down. I opened the Notes app. There was a single entry, time-stamped 2 days before Nathan's death. Tuesday, 3 p.m. He'll be alone. Has to look like an accident. No one can suspect. I set the phone on the bed next to the blanket, and I sat very still in the lamplight for a long time. Nathan hadn't fallen. My son had not slipped on his own staircase on a Tuesday afternoon in September. He had been alone in that house, and someone had known he would be alone. Someone had planned it. Someone had needed it to look like an accident. Outside, the wind pressed against the window, and the leaves scraped across the glass, and the house was silent around me in the way that empty houses are silent, like something holding its breath. I picked up my phone and dialed the one person I knew would believe me. Beverly answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Dorothy? It's 6 in the morning. Are you all right?" I pressed my hand flat over my mouth for a moment. Then I said, "Beverly, I need you to come over right now. Don't ask me questions. Just come." A pause, the sound of sheets moving. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. She was there in 12. Beverly Simmons has been my closest friend for over 20 years. She moved in next door the summer after Robert died, arriving with a U-Haul truck and a casserole dish and the particular no-nonsense energy of a woman who has survived enough of life to stop being frightened by most of it. She is 65 years old, sharp as a tack, and she has never once told me I was being dramatic when I wasn't being dramatic. She knocked on my front door at 6:12 in the morning wearing a mustard yellow cardigan thrown over her pajamas, her silver hair pulled back in a lopsided ponytail, and the expression of someone fully prepared to deal with whatever had gone wrong. I stepped aside to let her in without saying a word. I led her to my bedroom. I showed her the blanket spread open on the bed, the cut threads along the bottom edge, the small black phone still connected to the charger on my nightstand. Then I sat down beside her, and I told her everything. From the beginning. The dumpster, the flash of mint green, bringing the blanket home, the hard rectangle I'd felt between the layers of fabric, the scissors, the phone, and then what was on the phone. Beverly didn't interrupt once. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on my face, and she listened the way she has always listened, completely, without flinching, without looking for the exit. When I finished talking, she picked up the phone. She went through it herself. The photographs, the videos, the messages, the note. I watched her face move through surprise, then disbelief, then something harder and colder than either of those things. When she set the phone back down on the nightstand, her hands weren't entirely steady. She looked at me. "Dorothy," she said quietly, "this is evidence of murder. I know. We need to be very careful about what we do next. I know that too." I folded my hands in my lap. "But before we go to anyone, I need to know who that man is. The one saved as Dee. If I walk into a police station with a phone I pulled out of a garbage can, I need to know everything I can about what's on it." Beverly nodded slowly. She reached over and patted my hand once. Not softly, the way people pat your hand when they're trying to comfort you, but firmly, the way she does when she's agreeing to something serious. "All right," she said. "Then let's find him." I opened my laptop on the kitchen table while Beverly made coffee. We pulled up Vanessa's Facebook profile. She had never made it private, which struck me even then as the kind of small carelessness that very confident people allow themselves because they believe they are untouchable. Her friends list ran to several hundred names. "Filter for men whose names start with D," Beverly said, leaning over my shoulder with her coffee mug. That's how he was saved in the phone. I narrowed the search. Daniel, Douglas, David, 3 of them. Donovan, Derek. I started opening profiles one by one, comparing each face to the man in the photographs on the hidden phone. Daniel was too old. Douglas lived in another state. The Davids didn't match. Then I clicked on Derek Sutton, and there he was. The same broad shoulders, the same dark hair going slightly gray at the temples, the same easy, confident smile. The smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted without having to work very hard for it. "That's him," I said. Beverly set down her coffee mug. "Are you certain?" I held the phone up next to the laptop screen. Same jaw, same eyes. Same man who had his arm around my son's wife in a candlelit restaurant 4 years ago while my son was at the hospital saving other people's lives. Completely certain. Derek Sutton, 38 years old, construction supervisor. His LinkedIn profile was unremarkable. Project management, commercial builds, a dozen mutual connections with people from the hospital where Nathan and Vanessa had both worked. His Facebook photos went back several years, but there was nothing recent, and nothing, not a single image, not a single tagged post, that connected him to Vanessa. As if that entire chapter of their lives had been carefully erased. "We need more," AA said. "A phone pulled from the trash and a Facebook profile aren't enough." Beverly looked at me steadily over the rim of her mug. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that if Vanessa hid a phone inside a baby blanket, she may have hidden other things too. Documents, records, things she wanted to keep but didn't want found." Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then, "You want to go to the house?" "I want to see Lily," I said. "And while I'm seeing Lily, I want you to look around." I sent the text at 9:15 that morning. "Hi, Vanessa. I know I've been reaching out a lot lately and I don't want to be a bother, but I really miss Lily. Would it be all right if I stopped by this afternoon, just for a little while? I found some things of Nathan's I thought you might want." Mentioning Nathan's name was calculated. I'm not proud of the calculation, but I'm not ashamed of it either. 25 minutes passed before she replied. "Today isn't great. Lily's been fussy." I typed back immediately. "Please, Vanessa, just 30 minutes. I won't stay long, I promise." Another pause. Longer this time. "Fine, 3 o'clock. But I have things to do after." I put down the phone and looked at Beverly. 3 o'clock, I said. Beverly straightened up and squared her shoulders the way she does when she's decided something. "Then we have time to prepare." The plan was simple. Beverly would come with me, but stay in the car initially. Once I was inside and had Vanessa occupied, I'd text Beverly a signal, 1 word now, and Beverly would come to the door with an excuse. The need for a restroom. Something ordinary and unthreatening. While I kept Vanessa's attention, Beverly would look for whatever there was to find. It wasn't a sophisticated plan, but it was what we had. At 2:45, we pulled onto Vanessa's street. I parked 2 houses down. Beverly stayed in the passenger seat, and I walked up the front path alone, carrying a small paper bag with a set of wooden stacking toys inside, the ones I'd originally bought for the mailbox. My heart was hitting the inside of my ribs hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I rang the bell. Footsteps inside. Then the door opened. Vanessa was wearing black trousers and a salmon-colored silk blouse, her hair smoothed into a low knot, her makeup as precise as always. She smiled the smile that I had once taken for warmth, and now understood was simply a thing her face did on command. "Dorothy, come in." The house smelled of lavender and lemon oil, and something underneath both of those things. Something cool and sealed, like a room that doesn't get opened often enough. Everything was immaculate. The throw pillows aligned. The surfaces bare and polished. A house that looked curated rather than lived in. "Where's Lily?" I asked. "Upstairs. I'll get her." She went up the staircase, the same staircase, and I stood in the entryway and looked at every step, the pale wood treads, the white-painted banister. I had imagined this staircase so many times in the 3 years since Nathan died, tried to picture exactly how it happened, tried to make it make sense in the way that senseless things never quite do. Now I understood why it had never made sense. It hadn't been an accident, and the staircase wasn't a crime scene that had been overlooked. It was a stage set that had worked exactly as intended. Vanessa came back down with Lily on her hip. My granddaughter had grown so much. 3 years old now, her dark hair falling in soft, loose curls past her shoulders, her brown eyes enormous and watchful. She was holding a small stuffed bear with a worn ear, clearly much loved, clearly carried everywhere. When she saw me, her whole face changed. "Grandma Dorothy!" She reached her arms out and I took her, and I held her against my chest and I breathed her in. Baby shampoo and something sweet. Cookie crumbs, maybe. The smell of a child who is loved and cared for and entirely unaware of the darkness surrounding her small life. "Hi, my sweetheart," I said into her hair. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too," she said seriously. "Want to see my bear?" "I absolutely want to see your bear." We sat on the living room floor, Lily and I, and she introduced me to the bear whose name was, apparently, Captain. She told me a long and involved story about Captain's recent adventures that I could only partially follow, and I listened and responded and asked questions, and the whole time I watched Vanessa out of the corner of my eye. She was standing near the window with her phone in her hand. Not sitting, not relaxed. Her weight was shifted forward, her jaw slightly tight, her eyes moving between the screen and the front door at intervals that seemed involuntary, like she was expecting something or someone, and the waiting was costing her something. I filed that away. I pulled out my phone and sent Beverly the single word, "Now." 2 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Vanessa looked up sharply. "Are you expecting someone?" "Me? No." I kept my voice easy, faintly puzzled. "I came alone." She went to the door. I heard Beverly's warm, unhurried voice. "Oh, hi there. I'm so sorry to bother you. I'm Beverly. I came with Dorothy. And I know this is terribly embarrassing, but I've been having some stomach trouble today, and I hate to ask, but would you mind if I used your restroom? It's urgent, I'm afraid." A pause. I could picture Vanessa's face, calculating whether the inconvenience of saying no outweighed the social cost of it. "Down the hall, first door on the left," she said. "Oh, bless you. Thank you so much." I heard Beverly's footsteps come inside, heard the hallway bathroom door close, and then I focused every bit of my attention on keeping Vanessa's eyes on me. I asked about her work schedule. I asked whether Lily was sleeping well. I mentioned that I'd found some photographs of Nathan from before he went to medical school. Would she like copies for Lily when she was older? The name landed on Vanessa the way Nathan's name always landed on her now. A slight tightening around the eyes, a fractional stiffening of the jaw, there and gone in less than a second. "That would be fine," she said, "when she's older." "He would have loved seeing her at this age," I said. "He used to say she had his mother's stubborn streak." Vanessa pressed her lips together. "Nathan loved a lot of things. The way she said it, flat, faintly bitter, as if love itself were a character flaw, sent something cold moving through me. Then she stood up. "Your friend is taking a long time." "Oh, you know how it is at our age," I said immediately, keeping my voice light and slightly self-deprecating. "Everything takes longer than it used to." She's probably mortified. Vanessa sat back down, but the restlessness was coming off her in waves now. I took a breath and said, "Actually, Vanessa, I've been meaning to ask. Lily's mint green blanket, the one I knitted for her. I haven't seen it in a while. Is she still using it?" Something happened in Vanessa's face. It was fast. Half a second, maybe less. But I was watching for it, and I saw it. A flash of something that was not quite controlled. Her eyes went to a point somewhere behind me before she pulled them back to my face. "Of course," she said. "It's in the wash. It got dirty." Her voice was smooth. Her expression had closed back down to neutral, but her left hand, resting on her knee, had curled into the faintest fist. "Oh, that's good," I said warmly. "I'm so glad you're still using it. Nathan loved that blanket from the first moment he saw it." I said his name again deliberately, watched the small involuntary wince she couldn't quite suppress. "Yes," she said. "Nathan loved many things. The same words as before, the same flat, spent bitterness, as if his love had been an inconvenience she'd had to manage for years." Beverly appeared in the hallway doorway. "I am so sorry about that," she said, with exactly the right note of mild embarrassment. "Thank you for your patience." She walked toward me and rested her hand briefly on my shoulder. The touch was light, but she pressed once, firmly, deliberately. She'd found something. I kissed the top of Lily's head and she hugged my neck and said, "Come back soon, Grandma Dorothy." And it took everything I had to set her down calmly and stand up and say my goodbyes to Vanessa like a woman who had simply stopped by to visit her granddaughter. Vanessa walked us to the door. She closed it behind us before we'd reached the end of the front path. Not quite a slam, but close. The sound of someone who was relieved to have us gone. Beverly and I walked to the car in complete silence. We got in. I pulled the doors closed. I turned to her. She was already reaching into the large canvas tote bag she carries everywhere. Her hand came out holding a manila envelope, slightly bent from being folded against her side. "It was in her bedroom closet," Beverly said quietly, "in a shoebox behind some winter sweaters. I almost missed it." I opened the envelope. The first document was Nathan's life insurance policy. $500,000. Beneficiary, Vanessa Reed Harwell. A handwritten notation in the margin, the date the claim had been filed, 3 months after my son's death. The funds dispersed in full. The second document was a bank statement, a large account I didn't recognize, not Nathan's. 3 months after the insurance payout, a wire transfer, $200,000. Recipient account name, Derek Sutton. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. She paid him, I thought. She paid him $200,000, and it came directly out of the money she collected for killing my son. "There's more," Beverly said. I looked up. Her face was careful, the expression of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have to deliver. She reached into the envelope and drew out a single sheet of paper, a photocopied document, slightly grainy, as if it had been copied from a copy. A birth certificate. I looked at the top line. Baby girl, October. The year was right. The year Lily was born. I looked at the line for the mother's name. It did not say Vanessa Reed. It said Callie Monroe. The date of birth on the certificate was 2 months earlier than the date Vanessa had announced Lily's arrival. 2 full months. I looked up at Beverly. She looked back at me. "Vanessa was never pregnant," Beverly said softly. "She faked it. The loose clothes, the symptoms, the whole stories, all of it. Lily isn't her biological daughter." The words sat between us in the car like something physical. I looked out through the windshield at the empty street, at the White House with its tidy garden, at the front door that had just closed behind us, and I thought about Lily on that living room floor, introducing me to her bear with the serious brown eyes that were Nathan's eyes, that were only Nathan's eyes because Nathan had chosen her and loved her and held her in a mint green blanket and called her his daughter. And she was. She was his daughter in every way that mattered. Biology was the smallest part of what made a family, but somewhere out there was a woman named Callie Monroe who was Lily's real mother, and we had no idea where she was. "We need to find her," I said. Beverly's voice was very quiet. "I know. But Dorothy," I looked up that name before we drove here, while I was waiting in the car. Something in her tone made me go still. "Callie Monroe was reported missing," Beverly said. 4 years ago. Local paper ran a story. 23 years old. She disappeared, leaving behind a 2-month-old baby." The car was absolutely silent. "There was a second article," Beverly continued. "From about 6 months ago. They found remains in an abandoned lot outside the city, identified her by dental records." Her voice dropped another register. "Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head." I sat with that for a long moment. Head trauma. The same words the doctor had used about Nathan. The same words. "Ashley didn't just kill Nathan," I said. I heard my own voice coming from somewhere very far away. "She killed Callie Monroe. She killed the woman whose baby she stole." Beverly reached over and put both her hands around mine. Outside the car, the October afternoon was bright and ordinary and perfectly indifferent to everything we had just understood. That evening, sitting at my kitchen table with the documents spread out between us and Beverly's untouched tea going cold in her cup, I searched for Callie Monroe on my laptop. I found the newspaper articles Beverly had mentioned. A photograph of a young woman with long dark hair and quiet eyes. The kind of eyes that looked like they'd seen harder things than a 23-year-old should have seen. The missing persons report described her as a former patient at St. Catherine's Medical Center, where she'd been treated for complications during her pregnancy. No family in the area, no local support network. Alone, vulnerable, and Vanessa had found her there. I pushed that thought aside and kept searching. One of the articles about Callie's disappearance quoted a former co-worker. She mentioned briefly that Callie had been seeing someone, a man who worked at the hospital. She didn't know his name, only that Callie had seemed happy about it, had talked about him with the kind of shy hopefulness that people have when something feels new and real. I picked up the phone and called Patricia Odom. Patricia had been a charge nurse at St. Catherine's for nearly 30 years. She had worked with Nathan for most of his time there. She was the kind of person who remembered everything and everyone, and she had sent me a handwritten condolence card after Nathan died that I still kept in my nightstand drawer. She answered on the second ring. I asked her carefully, without explaining why I was asking, if she remembered a lab technician named Callie Monroe ever being connected to anyone at the hospital, someone Callie might have been involved with. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You mean Owen Fletcher?" The name landed somewhere in my chest. "He was a lab tech," Patricia continued. "Sweet man, very quiet. He and that young patient. I remember people talking about it. It wasn't really encouraged, staff getting involved with patients, but they seemed genuinely fond of each other." "What happened to Owen?" I asked. Another pause. Longer. "He died, Dorothy. Car accident on the highway. Must be 3.5 years ago now. He lost control on a curve and went off an embankment. It was awful." She paused again. "Why are you asking about this?" "I'll explain soon," I told her. "I promise. Thank you, Patricia." I hung up and sat very still. Then I searched Owen Fletcher's accident online. The report came up quickly, a brief item from a local news site, 2 paragraphs, the kind of story that gets filed and forgotten. Single vehicle accident on Route 9 heading north out of the city. The driver, Owen Fletcher, age 29, was pronounced dead at the scene. No other vehicles involved. First on scene to report the accident, Vanessa Harwell, who stated she had been driving home from a hospital shift and witnessed the vehicle leave the road. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I looked at Beverly and I said, "She killed him too." Beverly's face had gone pale. "Owen Fletcher?" "Lily's biological father. The man Callie Monroe was seeing. Vanessa killed Callie to take the baby. She killed Owen because he could have claimed Lily, because he was a loose end she couldn't afford." I set the laptop down carefully on the table. "And then she killed Nathan for the insurance money. 3 people, 3 deaths that all looked like accidents or misfortune, and she was connected to every single one of them." The kitchen was very quiet. Beverly looked at me across the table for a long moment. "Dorothy," she said, "we have it to go to the police, tonight." I nodded. For the first time since I'd found that phone, I felt something settle in me. Not peace exactly, but resolution. The particular steadiness that comes when you stop trying to make sense of something and simply decide what you're going to do about it. "First thing in the morning," I said. "We bring everything, and we tell them all of it." Beverly reached across the table and closed her hand over mine. "He would be proud of you," she said. "Nathan would be so proud of you." I didn't answer. I looked out the kitchen window at the dark backyard, at the rose bushes I'd planted the year Nathan was born, standing bare and thorned in the October cold. "I'm not done yet," I said quietly. I didn't sleep. I sat up through the long dark hours, going through the evidence again and again. The phone, the photographs, the messages, the note, the insurance documents, the bank transfer, the birth certificate with Callie Monroe's name on it. I arranged it in my mind the way you arrange pieces of a puzzle when you finally have enough of them to see the whole picture. Vanessa Reed had not stumbled into any of this. She had not acted on impulse or in a moment of desperation. She had planned, step by methodical step, over the course of years. She had met Callie Monroe in a hospital ward and identified her as someone useful, young, alone, without resources, carrying a child she couldn't care for. She had befriended her, offered her a place to stay, gained her trust completely, and then exploited every part of it. She had fabricated a pregnancy for Nathan's benefit. Loose clothing, careful timing, a performance of symptoms sustained over months. Nathan, who trusted her, who loved her, who wanted nothing more than to become a father, had never questioned it. When Lily was born to Callie in October, Vanessa had taken the baby and told Nathan it was his, and then she had made Callie Monroe disappear. Owen Fletcher, who might have asked questions, who might have looked for the child he didn't know he had followed Callie into the ground 6 months later, in an accident on a highway at night, with Vanessa conveniently present to report it. And then Nathan. Patient, loving, trusting Nathan, who would never have agreed to a divorce, who had built a life around this family and this child. Nathan had been the final obstacle between Vanessa and everything she'd decided she deserved. 3 people, 3 deaths, 1 meticulous, cold-blooded plan, and a phone hidden in a baby blanket that was never supposed to be found. When the gray pre-dawn light finally started coming through my bedroom window, I got up, washed my face, and put on my coat. It was time. Detective Ray Caldwell had the kind of face that gave nothing away easily. He was 45, maybe a few years older, with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, and eyes the color of worn denim, steady and direct and slightly tired in the way that comes not from lack of sleep, but from having seen too much of what people are capable of doing to each other. He was wearing a beige button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows, and he had a yellow legal pad in front of him that was already half covered in notes before I'd finished my second sentence. Beverly and I had arrived at the precinct at 9 in the morning. The building was gray concrete, utilitarian, smelling of old coffee and photocopier toner, and something vaguely institutional that I couldn't name. A receptionist at the front desk had taken our names and made us wait in a small room with plastic chairs and a wall clock that ticked very loudly. Ray Caldwell came through the door at 9:15, shook both our hands, and led us to his office. I told him everything. I started with Nathan's death 3 years ago, and I didn't leave anything out. The blanket, the dumpster, bringing it home, the hidden seam and what was sewn inside, the photographs on the phone, the messages with D, the note, Tuesday, 3 p.m. He'll be alone, has to look like an accident. No one can suspect. The visit to Vanessa's house, the manila envelope Beverly had found in the closet, the insurance payout, the wire transfer to Derek Sutton, the birth certificate with Callie Monroe's name on it, the newspaper articles about Callie's disappearance and the discovery of her remains, Owen Fletcher and the highway accident that Vanessa had been first on the scene to report. Ray listened to all of it without interrupting once. His pen moved steadily across the legal pad. When I slid each piece of evidence across the desk toward him, the phone, the insurance documents, the bank statement, the copied birth certificate, he examined each one carefully, his expression giving away nothing except concentration. When I finished speaking, the office was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall above his filing cabinet. Ray set down his pen. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long moment. "Mrs. Harwell," he said finally, "in 22 years on this job, I've had a lot of people come in here with a lot of stories. Most of them turn out to be misunderstandings or grief looking for somewhere to land." He paused. "This is not one of those situations." He leaned forward again and picked up the phone. He read through the messages one more time, slowly. Then he set it down and folded his hands on the desk. "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to request an exhumation order for your son's body. Second autopsy, full forensic workup. I'm going to formally reopen the investigation into Callie Monroe's death and look at Owen Fletcher's accident with fresh eyes. I'm going to bring Derek Sutton in for questioning." He paused. "And I'm going to put discreet surveillance on Vanessa Harwell's house starting today." I exhaled slowly. "What about Lily?" I asked. "She's still in that house." Ray's expression shifted, just slightly, just enough to show that he understood exactly what that question cost me. "Legally, Vanessa is still Lily's guardian," he said carefully. "I can't remove a child from a home without a court order, and I can't get a court order without building a solid evidentiary case first. If I move too fast and the case isn't airtight, her lawyer gets it thrown out and she walks." He looked at me steadily. "I know that's not what you want to hear." "No," I said, "it isn't. But my officers will be watching that house. If anything changes, if she tries to take Lily somewhere, if anything seems wrong, we will know." Beverly spoke from the chair beside me. "How long will the investigation take?" Ray picked up his pen again. "Depends on what we find. If the second autopsy turns up what I think it might turn up, a few weeks. If the forensics on Callie Monroe's case cooperate." He shook his head slightly. "I'll be in touch, Mrs. Harwell, every step of the way." He stood and extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm and unhurried, the handshake of a man who meant what he said. You did the right thing coming in, he told me. Not everyone would have. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I went through the motions of ordinary living, watering my plants, eating meals I couldn't taste, watching the evening news without taking in a single word, while Ray Caldwell's updates came in every few days, each one adding another layer to a picture that kept getting darker the more of it I could see. The second autopsy on Nathan came back first. Ray called me on a Thursday afternoon, 11 days after our visit to the precinct. I was sitting in the armchair by the window, the same armchair where I had knitted Lily's blanket 4 years earlier, and his voice was careful and measured in the way that people's voices get when they are about to confirm something terrible. The forensic pathologist found something the original autopsy missed, he said. Bruising on both wrists, circumferential, consistent with restraint. Someone held your son's arms while he was pushed. I pressed my hand over my mouth. Nathan didn't fall, Ray continued quietly. He was held and pushed. The angle of the head injury is consistent with a fall from the top of the staircase with forward momentum applied from behind. It was not an accident, Mrs. Harwell. The medical examiner is prepared to reclassify the cause of death. I sat in the armchair for a long time after I hung up, in the room where I had made something beautiful with my hands for my son's daughter, and I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not just the confirmation of what I already knew, but the specific, particular horror of it. Nathan held, Nathan afraid, Nathan at the top of those pale wood stairs with no way out. I let myself feel it completely, and then I folded it up and put it somewhere deep inside me where it would live for the rest of my life, and I stood up and I went to the kitchen and I put the kettle on, because there was still work to do. Derek Sutton broke on the second day of questioning. Ray told me later that he'd held up reasonably well the first afternoon, denied everything, said he barely knew Vanessa, claimed their relationship had been nothing more than professional. But when Ray spread the bank statement on the table between them, $200,000 with Derek's name on the receiving account, Derek's composure came apart at the seams. He asked for a lawyer. The lawyer arrived. And then, apparently, the lawyer looked at the evidence and told Derek Sutton something very straightforward about the difference between the sentences available to a cooperative witness and an uncooperative defendant. Derek started talking. He confirmed the affair. He confirmed that Vanessa had come to him approximately 10 days before Nathan's death and laid out the plan in terms he described to Ray as businesslike, like she was describing a work project. He said he'd told her she was insane. He said he'd told her he wanted no part of it. He said she'd shown him the insurance policy, $500,000, and told him his share would be $200,000, and that all he had to do was be there, make sure Nathan couldn't fight back, and let her handle the rest. He said he'd told himself it wasn't real, that she was venting, that it would never actually happen. And then, Ray told me, his voice carefully neutral, he showed up on a Tuesday afternoon in September when Nathan was home alone, and he helped. I had to set the phone down for a moment. He held Nathan's arms, I said when I could speak again. From behind. Yes. And Vanessa pushed him. Yes. And then she called 911 and told them her husband had fallen. Yes. The word landed each time like a stone dropped into still water. There's something else, Ray said. Derek says Vanessa filmed it. Some of it. She told him she needed insurance in case he ever thought about turning on her. She kept the recording somewhere he didn't know about. A recording, I said slowly, of what she did to Nathan. Apparently, we're going to need to search the house. The search warrant came through on a Friday morning. Ray called me at 7:15 and asked if I wanted to be present. I said yes without hesitation. Beverly drove us over. The house looked different, with 3 police cruisers parked in front of it, and uniformed officers moving through the rooms in gloves. Smaller somehow. Less imposing. Like a stage set after the audience has gone home and the lights have come all the way up. I stood in the entryway and watched them work. They went through everything systematically. Drawers, closets, cabinets, the spaces under furniture, the gap between the washer and the dryer. They rolled back rugs. They knocked on walls, listening for the particular hollow sound that means something has been built to conceal something else. After 2 hours, they had found nothing significant. After 3 hours, an officer I didn't know by name went down the basement stairs, and about 10 minutes later I heard him call up, "Detective Caldwell, down here." We followed Ray to the basement. It was a finished space. Storage shelves, a utility area, a dehumidifier humming in the corner. One wall was lined with a large dark wood bookshelf, floor to ceiling, holding labeled boxes and old binders, and the kind of accumulated domestic paperwork that most households just gradually accumulate. The officer had shifted the bookshelf away from the wall on one end. Behind it, set flush into the drywall at about waist height, was a small steel safe door. Recessed, painted over at some point to match the wall. You would never have seen it if you weren't looking, and you would never have thought to look if you hadn't moved the shelf. Ray called in a locksmith. We waited in the basement, nobody speaking much. 20 minutes later, the safe door swung open. Inside, 2 external hard drives, 4 USB drives arranged in a small labeled row, a manila folder of printed documents, a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band. Everything organized. Everything labeled in Vanessa's neat, precise handwriting. Ray pulled on fresh gloves before he touched anything. He opened the manila folder first, looked through the documents briefly, then set it aside. He picked up one of the hard drives and looked at the label. Nathan, he read quietly. She labeled it with his name. He bagged the drives carefully. Then he looked up. We'll need to look at these at the lab, but if what Derek described is on these drives... He didn't finish the sentence. It'll be over, I said. It'll be over, he agreed. It was over sooner than I expected. The hard drive labeled Nathan contained, among other things, a video file, 47 seconds long, shot from a fixed position on a high shelf, looking down at a staircase. I did not watch it. I did not need to. Ray described it to me in the careful, clinical language of law enforcement, which I was grateful for. It showed what had happened on that Tuesday afternoon in September, 3 years ago, in the clear and unambiguous terms of recorded fact. There was also a video that Vanessa had recorded of herself. This one Ray played for me, sitting across his desk from me and Beverly, his expression steady and unreadable. He turned the laptop to face me. Vanessa on screen, sitting in what looked like her bedroom, the safe open behind her, speaking directly into the camera with the composed, unhurried manner of someone dictating a memo. If anyone is watching this, it means I made a mistake somewhere along the way. I want it on record that I don't regret any of it. Nathan was weak. Callie was a means to an end. Owen was a liability. I saw opportunities that other people were too timid or too sentimental to take. I simply wasn't. She reached forward and the screen went dark. The office was very quiet. Beverly beside me made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. I looked at the blank laptop screen for a long moment. She was proud of it, I said finally. Yes, Ray said. I've been doing this job for 22 years and I've rarely seen anything quite like it. He closed the laptop. We have enough, he said simply. More than enough. The call came at 5:17 in the morning, 11 days after the hard drives were recovered. My phone rang on the nightstand and I was awake before the second ring. I had been sleeping badly for weeks, drifting in and out of thin, restless half-sleep, and my hand found the phone in the dark almost before I was fully conscious. Ray's voice, tight and urgent in a way I had never heard from him before. Mrs. Harwell, I need you to come to the precinct right now. Something happened overnight. Lily, I said immediately. Is Lily? Lily is safe. She's here with us. Come now. Beverly was at my door in 8 minutes. I don't remember the drive. Ray met us in the lobby and walked us through a corridor I hadn't been in before, to a room with a long window of one-way glass set into the wall. On the other side of the glass, an interrogation room. Small table. 2 chairs. Fluorescent lighting. Vanessa was sitting in one of the chairs. She was in the same salmon blouse she'd been wearing the afternoon we visited, which meant she'd been picked up in the night. Her hair had come half down from its knot. Her mascara had traced 2 thin lines down her cheeks and dried there. Without the full armor of her usual presentation, she looked, not smaller exactly, but realer, more like an ordinary person and less like a performance of one. The handcuffs on her wrists caught the fluorescent light. She tried to leave the country, Ray said quietly, standing beside me. We had a flag on her passport through the surveillance order. She showed up at the airport at 2:30 this morning, herself and Lily, both carrying luggage. She had fraudulent passports for both of them, different names. In her checked bags, we found $480,000 in cash, divided across 3 suitcases. I kept my eyes on Vanessa through the glass. She knew the investigation was closing in, Ray continued. Our best estimate is she'd been planning the exit for at least 2 weeks. She was going to disappear. New identities, cash that can't be traced, a country without an extradition treaty. And Lily, I said. Lily is in the children's services room down the hall. She's scared and confused, but she's physically fine. Susan Hartley from Child Protective Services is with her. I turned away from the window. Take me to her, I said. The children's services room was painted yellow and had low bookshelves along the walls and a bin of stuffed animals in the corner. There were crayon drawings taped to the window. A house, a sun, a lopsided dog. Someone had thought carefully about what this room needed to feel like for a small, frightened child, and I was grateful to them for it. Lily was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, her knees drawn up to her chest, her arms wrapped around Captain the Bear. Her hair was tangled. She was wearing pajamas with small yellow stars on them, and her face when I came through the door was a complicated mixture of fear and relief and 3-year-old exhaustion that broke my heart in 2 entirely different directions at once. "Grandma Dorothy," she said, and her voice cracked on the last syllable. I crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside her and gathered her into my arms, and she pressed her face into my shoulder, and I held her there, rocking slightly, not saying anything for a long time. "I've got you," I finally said into her hair. "I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe." "Where are we?" she asked, muffled against my shoulder. "We're somewhere safe. You're going to come home with me." She pulled back and looked at me with Nathan's eyes, serious and searching, taking in everything. "Is Mommy in trouble?" she asked. I looked at my granddaughter's face, and I made a decision that I have never once reconsidered. "Mommy has some things she needs to sort out," I said carefully, "but you don't need to worry about any of that right now. Right now, you just need to stay with me." She looked at me for another moment. Then she nodded, slowly, with the solemn gravity of a very small person who has decided to trust something larger than themselves. She put her head back on my shoulder. I held her, and I looked at the crayon drawings on the window, and I thought, Nathan, I have her. She's safe. Susan Hartley, the Child Protective Services worker, was a woman in her mid-40s with a calm, unhurried manner and a kind face. She conducted her evaluation gently and thoroughly, asking me questions about my health, my living situation, my support network. Beverly, who had followed us down the hall, answered half the questions before I did. By the time we left the building 2 hours later, I had been granted temporary legal guardianship of Lily Harwell. I buckled her into the back seat of Beverly's car, and she fell asleep before we reached the end of the parking lot. Captain tucked under her chin, her face finally, completely relaxed. I watched her in the rearview mirror the whole way home. The trial opened on a Monday morning in February, 4 months after Vanessa's arrest. The courtroom was fuller than I had expected. Journalists in the back rows, family members of other victims I was only just learning about, and a quiet, attentive gallery of ordinary people who had followed the case in the news and wanted to see how it ended. There were cameras on the courthouse steps that I walked past with my eyes straight ahead, Beverly's hand steady on my arm. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table. The prosecutor was a woman named Gloria Ashby, 43, compact, with short natural hair and a way of moving through a courtroom that reminded me of someone who had been in many difficult rooms and had never once been the one who left first. When Vanessa was brought in, the room shifted, a collective, almost involuntary reorientation toward her, the way a room full of people responds to the entrance of someone they've all been thinking about. She was wearing a dark gray suit. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry. Her face was composed and her posture was straight, and she looked, if you didn't know what you were looking at, like a composed professional attending a formal proceeding. She sat down beside her attorney and folded her hands on the table. And then she looked up, and her eyes found mine across the courtroom. I held her gaze. I had thought about this moment many times in the months since her arrest, had wondered what I would feel when I finally sat across from her in a room where she could no longer walk away or close a door between us. I had expected rage. I had half expected grief. What I actually felt, sitting there with my hands quiet in my lap and my eyes steady on her face, was something colder and more absolute than either of those things. I felt the particular resolution of someone who has already done the hardest thing and is simply waiting for the world to catch up. Vanessa looked away first. Gloria Ashby presented the case with the systematic precision of someone laying the foundation of a building, one beam at a time, each one load-bearing, nothing decorative or wasted. The photographs from the hidden phone, the messages with Derek Sutton, the note, the forensic findings from Nathan's second autopsy, the insurance payout, the wire transfer, Callie Monroe's birth certificate and the evidence of falsified adoption records, the re-examination of Owen Fletcher's accident, and the video files from the safe. The courtroom was very quiet when the video of Vanessa speaking to the camera was played. I had already seen it, but hearing her voice fill that large, formal room, I don't regret any of it. Nathan was weak. Callie was a means to an end. Had a different weight than it had in Ray Caldwell's office. It had the weight of permanence. It was on the record now. It would always be on the record. Derek Sutton testified on the third day of the trial. He entered the courtroom in a gray prison jumpsuit, thinner than the man in the photographs, with the particular quality of someone who has been living inside the consequences of his choices for several months and has aged considerably in the process. His attorney had negotiated a plea agreement, 25 years in exchange for full cooperation. He would be 63 when he was eligible for parole. He sat in the witness box and he told the truth. He described the affair. He described the plan. He described arriving at the house on that Tuesday afternoon in September. Nathan opened the door, Derek said. His voice was low, and he was looking at the table in front of him rather than at the gallery or the jury. He wasn't expecting anyone. He looked surprised to see me. Before he could say anything, Vanessa came up behind him on the stairs. She'd been upstairs waiting. He stopped, swallowed. I grabbed his arms from behind. He struggled. He was strong. He was stronger than I expected. And then Vanessa, He stopped again. The courtroom was absolutely silent. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful at all. She pushed him, Derek said, hard, both hands between his shoulder blades, and he went down, all the way down. I felt Beverly's hand close over mine. I did not look away. I owed Nathan that much, to sit in this room and hear this said out loud and not look away. I just stood there, Derek said. I stood at the top of the stairs and I just stood there. And Vanessa walked past me to get her phone, and she called 911 and she was crying before the dispatcher even answered. And his voice broke completely for the first time. I just stood there. Vanessa's attorney mounted a vigorous defense. Derek was lying to save himself. The phone evidence was circumstantial. The video in the safe had been fabricated. There was no physical evidence directly placing Vanessa's hands on Nathan Harwell. Gloria Ashby's rebuttal was 7 minutes long and left no air in the room. Vanessa Harwell is not a person who acted in a moment of weakness, she said, standing before the jury with her hands quiet at her sides. She is not someone who made a terrible mistake and has lived in remorse ever since. She planned the murder of her husband over a period of months. She murdered a vulnerable young woman to take her child. She murdered that child's father to eliminate a loose end. She sat across from her mother-in-law at a funeral and held the woman while she grieved and told her everything would be all right. And then she went home and waited for the insurance payment. She paused. The only mistake Vanessa Harwell made was underestimating a 69-year-old grandmother who loved her son enough to dig through a dumpster on a Tuesday afternoon. That is the only thing she got wrong. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they came back, the forewoman stood with a sheet of paper in her hands and read each count in a clear, steady voice. Murder in the first degree, Nathan Harwell. Guilty. Murder in the first degree, Callie Monroe. Guilty. Murder in the first degree, Owen Fletcher. Guilty. 3 additional counts related to the deaths of elderly patients under Vanessa's care. Patients whose autopsies, reopened during the investigation, had revealed traces of medications consistent with intentional overdose. Patients whose wills had been modified in the weeks before their deaths, with significant sums diverted to accounts ultimately traceable to Vanessa and Derek. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The judge sentenced Vanessa Harwell to 6 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Vanessa sat through the reading of the sentence with her hands folded on the table and her face showing nothing. Not fear, not grief, not the performance of remorse that defendants sometimes offer in these moments, in the hope that it will matter. Nothing at all. She was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, and I watched her go, and I felt the strange, quiet emptiness of the end of something that has cost everything. Ray Caldwell appeared at my elbow. "Justice," he said simply. "Yes," I said, but it didn't bring him back. Ray looked at me for a moment. "No," he said, "it didn't. But you gave Lily a life she wouldn't have had. That's not nothing, Mrs. Harwell. That's not a small thing." The months following the trial were quieter than I expected. The media attention faded the way media attention always fades, gradually, then suddenly, replaced by other stories and other tragedies. Beverly and I resumed our Thursday evening dinners and our afternoon tea and our long conversations on her back porch in the summer, and slowly the shape of ordinary life reasserted itself around all the things that had happened. Lily moved into the yellow bedroom I painted for her and arranged her stuffed animals along the windowsill with great seriousness and fell asleep most nights before I'd finished the third page of whatever book we were reading together. The nightmares came in the early weeks. She'd wake crying, calling for someone in a voice I couldn't quite parse, and I'd go to her and sit with her in the dark and hold her until the breathing evened out again, not trying to explain anything, just being present. By spring, she was sleeping through the night. By summer, she was laughing again the way small children laugh, fully, without reservation, giving the whole thing over to it. She started calling me Grandma Dot. Then, one evening when she was 4, she looked up from her crayons with the particular focused expression she gets when she has been thinking something through carefully and said, "Can I call you Mom, Grandma?" "What does Mom, Grandma mean?" I asked. "It means you're my grandma," she said patiently, "but also you're like my mom, because you take care of me like a mom does." I looked at this small, serious person with Nathan's eyes and Callie Monroe's quiet watchfulness and a completely unique spirit that belonged entirely to herself. "Mom, Grandma," I said, "is the best thing anyone has ever called me." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her crayons. When Lily was 7, she asked me about her parents. I had prepared for this. I had thought carefully, over many evenings, about how to hold truth and protection in the same hands, how to give a child enough reality to build on without giving her more darkness than she could carry at 7 years old. "Your mom's name was Callie," I told her. "She was 23 years old, and she was very brave, and she loved you with her whole heart. She had to go to heaven before she got the chance to raise you herself. But before she went, she made sure you were taken care of." "And my dad?" "Your dad's name was Nathan. He was my son. He loved you from the very first moment he held you, and he would have been so proud of every single thing you are." Lily was quiet for a moment, turning this over. "So you're connected to me from my dad's side," she said. "That's right. And you take care of me the way my mom would have." "I try to." She reached over and took my hand with her small, firm grip. "Then we're connected from both sides," she said. "We're double connected." I held her hand and I did not trust myself to speak for a moment. "Yes," I finally said. "We're double connected. Exactly right." I told her the whole truth when she was 16. We sat at the kitchen table where Beverly and I had spread out all the evidence that October night years before, and I told her everything. Vanessa, the plan, the phone in the blanket, the trial. I told her about Callie Monroe and Owen Fletcher, her biological parents, who had been young and alive and full of their own futures until someone had decided they were obstacles. We cried together for a long time. When the crying was spent, Lily sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had gone cold and looked at the table surface for a while. Then she looked up at me. "You could have just walked away," she said. "That afternoon, when you saw the blanket in the dumpster, you could have decided it wasn't your business." "No," I said, "I couldn't have." "Why not?" I thought about it honestly. "Because it was the last thing Nathan ever gave you," I said. "And because I'm your grandmother. And because some things you simply don't walk away from." She got up from her chair and came around the table and put her arms around me, the way she had when she was 3 years old in that yellow-painted children's room at the precinct, completely, without reservation, giving the whole thing over to it. "Thank you," she said into my shoulder, "for not walking away." "Thank you," I said, "for giving me a reason to stay." Lily is 21 years old now. She is in her 3rd year of medical school studying pediatrics. She says she wants to work with children who have been through hard things, Children who need someone in the room with them who understands, from the inside, what it means to come through darkness and find yourself still standing. I am 87. Beverly is 83. We have tea every afternoon, and we talk about everything, and sometimes we don't talk at all, and that is fine too. Ray Caldwell retired 4 years ago and sends a Christmas card every year without fail. Susan Hartley came to Lily's high school graduation and cried. Derek Sutton died in prison 5 years ago, a heart attack at 53. I felt nothing when Ray told me. Not relief, not satisfaction. Only the flat indifference of a chapter that had been closed for a long time already. Vanessa Harwell is alive, serving her 6 consecutive life sentences in a maximum security facility 2 states away. She has never, by any account I have received, expressed remorse for anything. She remains, apparently, entirely herself. I have not seen her since she was led out of that courtroom, and I have no plans to. Isabella, Lily, once asked me whether I ever thought about visiting her. No, I said simply. Not even to ask why? I considered that for a moment. I know why, I said. She wanted money and she wanted freedom, and she didn't believe other people's lives were worth the inconvenience they caused her. That's the whole answer. I don't need to sit across a table from her to understand it. Lily nodded slowly. I don't need to either, she said. She's not part of my story. Not really. The people who are part of my story are you and Beverly, and the memory of 2 people who deserved so much more time than they got. 3 months ago, Lily came home for a weekend and brought me a gift. It was wrapped in lavender paper, tied with a white ribbon, and she sat across from me at the kitchen table and watched me open it with the expression she gets when she is trying very hard not to give something away. Inside the paper was a blanket, knitted by hand, soft as a whisper, mint green, the exact shade of new leaves in April, the exact shade of hope. I taught myself, she said. It took me 4 months. I unraveled it twice. Beverly helped me with the edging. I held it in both hands and I could not speak. I wanted to make something to replace the old one, Lily said. Not to erase it. I know we're keeping the old one, but to make something that's the same thing but different. The old blanket held a secret that needed to be found. This one, she paused. This one just holds love. That's all that's in it. I looked at my granddaughter across the kitchen table. This serious, brilliant, tender-hearted young woman who had been born into the middle of someone else's careful cruelty and had grown up into the best version of herself anyway. Partly through her own ferocious spirit, and partly, I like to believe, because she had been loved consistently and without conditions by the people around her. It's the most beautiful thing I have ever been given, I told her. She smiled, and it was Nathan's smile, the way his whole face opened up when something moved him, and it was also entirely hers. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her old yellow bedroom, I went to my room and I took the old blanket from the closet shelf where I have kept it all these years, washed and mended, the cut seam carefully re-sewn by my own hands. I laid it on the bed. Then I laid the new blanket beside it. 2 mint green blankets, almost identical at a glance, entirely different in what they carried. The old one had held a secret for years in the dark, waiting for the right hands to find it. It had been the beginning of everything, the thread I'd pulled that unraveled a lie that had been running for years, the quiet, ordinary object that had turned out to be the most important thing in the room. The new one held nothing hidden, no hard rectangles, no folded darkness, no evidence of anything except the months of patient work that had gone into making it. Just love, knitted stitch by careful stitch, the way I had made the first one, all those years ago, when Nathan was alive and Lily was on her way, and I sat in my armchair every evening and believed, completely and without reservation, in the future. I went to the cemetery the next morning, early before Lily was awake. Lilacs for Nathan, white roses for Callie Monroe. I stood at each grave for a long time, not saying very much. At Nathan's grave I said, "She's going to be a doctor. She's going to take care of children who need someone who understands. You would be so proud of her. I am proud of her every single day." At Callie's grave, I said, "She knows about you now. She knows you were brave and that you loved her. She carries you with her. I can see it sometimes, in the way she is careful with people who are alone or afraid. That's you in her. That's the part of her that came from you." The morning was cold and clear. the sky the particular pale blue of early spring. A bird was singing somewhere in the trees beyond the cemetery fence, the same 4 notes over and over, patient and unhurried. I walked back to the car and drove home. Lily was awake when I got there, standing at the kitchen counter making coffee, still in her pajamas, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked up when the door opened. "I made enough for 2, she said. "Good," I said. "I could use it." I sat down at the kitchen table and she brought the cups over and we sat together in the morning light, not talking much, watching the backyard through the window where my rose bushes were just beginning to bud. After a while, Lily said, "What are you thinking about?" I thought about it honestly. "About how strange it is," I said, "that something as small as a blanket can be the thing that changes everything. That I almost didn't stop that afternoon. That I almost drove past." Lily wrapped both hands around her mug. "But you didn't," she said. "No," I said, "I didn't." She looked at me across the table with those serious, deep brown eyes that I have loved since the first moment I saw them. Nathan's eyes and her own eyes. And something in them that was entirely new, that had never existed before she came into the world. "I think," she said carefully, "that some things are meant to be found. And the right person just has to be the one who decides to look." I held my coffee cup and I looked at my granddaughter and I thought about a Tuesday afternoon in October 18 years ago and a flash of mint green in the gap of a garbage bag and the particular quality of silence in a house where a decision is being made. "Yes," I said, "I think that's exactly right. The mint green blanket, the original one, is in my closet. I have kept it all these years and I will keep it until I am gone, and after that it will go to Lily. Because it belongs to her story more than anyone else's. It is worn in places now, and the color has faded to something softer than it was. But the lace edging I spent 4 extra days getting right is still firm and even. Some things are made to last. Some things hold on.